Hello and welcome. We are just a few minutes early. We'll be starting at right around 1 o'clock. And so thank you all for joining. Thank you for being early, and we will start in just a few minutes. Thank you to everyone who's joining us. We will be starting in just a few minutes at 1 o'clock. We still have quite a few people joining into the Zoom space. We will be starting in just a minute or two. Okay, it's now 1 o'clock, and I'll go ahead and get us started. Thank you to everyone who has joined us. There are still a few people coming into the Zoom space. I'll start off by introducing myself. My name is Cheryl Prowell. I'm a supervisory water resource control engineer in the Division of Water Quality at the State Water Resources Control Board. And you are joining the second workshop of the Vapor Intrusion Workshop Series of 2026, Vapor Intrusion in the Community. It is hosted by the Cali PA Vapor Intrusion Work Group. This session is being recorded, and by joining, you agree to be recorded. Next slide. So I'll start with a few logistics. You are in listen and participate mode. Automatic closed captions have been turned on. If you would like to follow along with the closed captions, please click on the CC button on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Please note we will not be taking questions through the chat feature today. It is only going to be used for sharing links and information with you. If you do want to provide a question in writing, either a technical question or a content question throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A feature. See the button at the bottom of the screen. On my slide, I have it highlighted in a red box. We will be monitoring that throughout the session and answering your questions as we go. When we get to the Q&A feature, we will take questions using the raised hand function, but we won't be monitoring that throughout the presentation. For those joining by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and let us know if you have a question. You'll be called on and prompted to unmute yourself by pressing *6. We will do our best to respond to questions in the order that they're received. Finally, please note that our presenters are hosting this workshop from different locations. Please bear with us if there are any time lags, pauses, or technical difficulties. We appreciate your patience, understanding, and cooperation in making this workshop a success today. Next slide. Next, I'd like to introduce the Cali PA Vapor Intrusion team. It's comprised of 3 agencies within the California Environmental Protection Agency umbrella, including our California Water Board offices, including the Division of Water Quality under the State Water Resources Control Board, and multiple regional water quality control boards, including the Los Angeles, Santa Ana, Central Valley, and San Francisco Bay regions, and the Department of Toxic Substances Control, or DTSC, and the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or a WEHA. And collectively, we are all part of Cali PA. This team was founded in 2014 to address the trichloroethylene short-term action levels and promote consistent vapor intrusion practice amongst our agencies. And in light of events at the national level, I do want to stress that the team putting on the presentation today are all state of California workers, not federal. The presentation today highlights that we personally and the California state agencies we work for remain committed to environmental justice, transparency, and fair treatment of all people. Next slide. Now I'd like to launch a poll. What affiliation do you represent today? And we're using this so that both we as the presenters and the audience get a sense of who's listening in today. All right, let's go ahead and close the poll. And so it looks like we have good representation of government employees showing our commitment to be consistent and calibrated with each other regardless of agency. There's quite a few environmental consultants online, a good number of industry representatives, so thank you to our regulated community for being present. And there are a few nonprofit and other attendees, and thank you so much for joining. You are really the target of our presentation today. Next slide. With that, I'll pass the mic over to Katie Butler, the Director of the Department of Toxic Substances Control, for some opening remarks.
Hi, welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katie Butler. I'm the Director of the Department of Toxic Substances Control. This is my second year serving as the Director of DTSC, and one of my 4 priorities this year is community engagement. And so that's why I am particularly excited about our agenda this afternoon that highlights the importance of community engagement for vapor intrusion work. Community engagement and consultation with tribal governments are both central to DTSC's work, and our understanding of environmental problems and our ability to deliver on our mission and address those environmental problems. We often get the most valuable information from the lived experiences of communities in areas overburdened with pollution where our work is happening. And so those lived experiences really do inform our work, our outcomes. And when I started my career in environmental science, my first job was working as a health risk assessor, and I conducted vapor intrusion assessments for a variety of cleanups up and down the state. I did some international work as well on military sites. And so I saw the full gamut of what could be encountered in vapor intrusion assessments. So I appreciate the technical complexities of this work. And I also understand the importance of community engagement on this topic, because communicating about vapor intrusion, it's so different than communicating about soil or water issues, because hazardous vapors typically cannot be seen, they cannot be smelled or felt, so they're invisible in that way. And on the other hand, contaminated soil and water, they're often more visible, more tangible, easier for us to understand how exposure can happen or how it can be avoided. So again, underscoring the importance of community engagement when it comes to vapor intrusion. Checking for vapor intrusion often requires access to homes and businesses, and this is very personal. It can be invasive for folks. As we all know, our home, it's our safe place. It's where people feel the most comfortable and at the same time the most vulnerable if workers are entering their home to sample. So it's not uncommon for us to find vapor intrusion contamination during development projects that our departments oversee, especially at urban infill properties. DTSC and the water boards both require public participation before cleanup or mitigation. And this is separate from the public engagement for building projects required by the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. So it's required even if development is exempt from CEQA. These public notices or requests for access for sampling, that might be the first time that community members hear about contamination near their homes or workplaces. And so clarity, completeness in communication is so important when we're working on these kinds of projects. And at Cali, PA, DTSC, water boards, we're working to be involved even earlier in the process to make sure communities are informed with as much notice as possible and have ample opportunity to ask questions, get clarifications on the work. Thank you to our partners at the Water Board. This partnership between our departments has been incredibly fruitful to bring our technical experts together and deliver this series of workshops. So thank you all for attending. And I will hand it over to my partner, fellow BDO leader, Annalisa, the director of the State Water Board. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Katie, and good afternoon to you all. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm Annalisa Kihara, Assistant Deputy Director in the Division of Water Quality at
It seems like Annalisa may be having technical difficulties. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide and we'll come back to Annalisa if she rejoins us. So we did start off this workshop series with a kickoff last July. We're, as I mentioned earlier, in the second workshop of this series for 2026. If you missed it, 2 weeks ago, we had a session called Vapor Intrusion Cleanup Case Basics. It was a great introduction to the concepts of vapor intrusion, really targeted to people who are new to environmental cleanup, new to the industry. So if you missed it, or if this would be a good tool to introduce people to vapor intrusion, it is recorded and it's available on our website. And we encourage you to make yourself available for the workshops coming up on March 10th, Conceptual Site Models and Best Practices, Path to Closure and Collective Decision Making in May, and in June, Vapor Intrusion Data. Okay, next slide. Do we have Annalisa back? Okay, I'll keep going with today's purpose. Our goals today are to share our agency's statewide mandates and goals for addressing vulnerable communities, share the status of the cleanup programs, addressing vapor intrusion in vulnerable communities, hear from the communities that are impacted and the groups that represent them, and to discuss together how the cleanup process and communication with communities can be improved. Next slide. So just so that we're all on the same page, I'll quickly go over some vapor intrusion basics. Vapor intrusion is the movement of chemicals in vapor, or the gas phase, from wherever they were released into buildings. On this slide, the release is shown from the drum at the left of the figure. The release moves through soil down either into soil or into groundwater. And from there, the chemicals can volatilize or off gas and move back up through soil through the gaps or the pockets between soil particles. Imagine a sponge and the holes in the sponge. The vapors move up and through gaps or cracks or utility lines into buildings. Some terms we may use: subslab soil vapor is vapors that are immediately below a building's foundation. Soil vapor are any vapors within the dry part of the soil above the groundwater. And ambient or outdoor air refers to vapors or air outside of a building. Next slide. To kick off the presentation, I do want to stress this quote that Steve McMasters introduced in our kickoff workshop last June. Partnering is a paradigm shift from unconscious mistrust and misunderstanding, arm's length formalized relationships, and interactions based on controls and sanctions, to conscious recognition of similar mandates and goals, common interests and needs, regular face-to-face interaction, disciplined collaboration, and mutual accountability. And this workshop series is really to create that feeling of partnership and feeling of partnering, that we're having an ongoing dialogue, both with our community partners, as well as the regulated community and the environmental consultants that represent them. Next slide. So these are the topics we're going to cover today. You've already heard the welcome and opening statements. And I'm just going to check again whether Annalisa is online and wants to finish hers. Oh, I see her.
I'm here. Apologies.
Go ahead, Annalisa. Thank you.
Thanks, and apologies to you all for getting cut off. Internet is wonderful, and hybrid, is something that we just are working out day to day. So as I was starting off, I just wanted to echo Katie's thank you, and wanted to just say thank you to you all for participating in this workshop today, and then just also share our appreciation for the representation of the various perspectives on vapor intrusion with us. I just wanted to note that at the water boards, we have a shared mission to preserve, enhance, and restore the quality of California's water resources and drinking water. And then also just share that that mission is strengthened by our commitment to racial equity and environmental justice. So as Katie mentioned, community engagement and environmental justice is important to our organizations under the Cal EPA umbrella, and we're committed to evaluating and making decisions on sites vulnerable to vapor intrusion impacts with this lens in mind. So I'll just end quickly with a big thank you to the Cal EPA Vapor Intrusion team who put a lot of time and thought into the content and materials for today's workshop, and then uplift and also share my appreciation to all of you here for taking the time to participate and collaborate with our team moving forward. So with that quick intro, appreciate you guys working with me, and I'll pass the mic back to you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Annalisa. So we just finished our opening statements and welcome. Next, I'm going to give us a summary of the discussion from our July 2025 kickoff about vapor intrusion in the community. Next, you'll hear from both DTSC and Water Board's environmental justice and racial equity efforts. Then you'll hear a community perspective offered by Lenny Siegel. You'll hear about both the Water Board's and DTSC's cleanup programs and how they are addressing environmental justice and racial equity. And then we'll open the floor up to open discussion, either questions or comments for us. Okay, next slide. So this is going to be a recap of the feedback that we received at the July 2025 workshop kickoff. Next slide. The feedback was grouped into a few themes. One of them was communication. We want the community members asked to have us simplify technical terms and avoid jargon and acronyms. I hope that this is one of the notes that you will hear throughout the presentation today. We really tried to take all of the feedback to heart. And so this one is one that you should understand our technical terms. If there are any terms throughout the day-to-day that you don't know, please put something in the Q&A feature and we'll define those terms for you. There was a request to provide outreach materials in multiple formats, digital, posters, etc., and in languages used in the community. Another theme was outreach strategies. We want to have transparent vetting of contractors to the extent possible, collaborative outreach, and offer to conduct air testing to build trust. There was a request to leverage social media and create agency guidance documents and fact sheets that are easy to understand. Next slide. On the note of community engagement, there was a request to prioritize face-to-face interactions and use existing meetings such as city council meetings or newsletters. Partner and engage with existing community groups such as parent-teacher associations, PTAs, neighborhood associations, or other existing organizations. And try to avoid comment periods during the holidays and provide opportunities for engagement in the evening or whatever times are most accessible to the particular community. Next slide. With that, I'll turn the presentation over to Andres Martinez, who will talk about advancing environmental justice and the role of environmental justice in DTSC's programs.
Thank you, Cheryl. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andres Martinez. I am the supervisor for our program of environmental justice and tribal affairs at DTSC. For our workshop, I'll be presenting and discussing how environmental justice is integrated into our programs and how we advance environmental justice throughout our work. Environmental justice is a central focus in the work that DTSC performs and serves as a foundational lens on how we support and coordinate with communities, especially those that are most vulnerable. Next slide, please. Thank you. We're a team of 4 staff members assigned to offices across California that serve as liaisons for our environmental justice communities to bring their voices and suggestions to DTSC's programs and decisions. We're guided by the principles of environmental justice that focus on fairness and equity and elevate the voices of our most vulnerable community members. We meet with environmental justice and community groups who have an interest and would like to provide feedback, input, and recommendations on DTSC's activities. And we coordinate with our internal programs to consult on the opportunities to advance environmental justice on our projects, programs, and initiatives. This effort is best exemplified by the collaborative meeting that we're having today with our DTSC staff and our water board partners, community representatives to inform our participants on vapor intrusion technologies in the communities that we serve. As we develop and grow our program, we continue to identify opportunities to create spaces where we can hear from the communities we work in on how we can create an environmental justice focused outcome within DTSC's work. Environmental justice is no longer a proposed component of what we should do. Rather, it should be a goal of the work towards every aspect, especially in those communities that are most impacted by our programs, projects, and initiatives. Next slide, please. Thank you. It's important to note a key piece of legislative language that was placed in the California Government Code defining what environmental justice is. Since regulatory departments like DTSC or the water boards can refer to it and evaluate how the work we perform achieves its intention and achievement towards a more environmentally just California. Our program in the Office of Environmental Equity, which focuses on communication and engagement within environmental justice communities, and our program's mission promotes environmental justice across the department and upholds our departmental mission to protect the people and environment of California from harmful chemicals. Our program's mission to broaden departmental transparency, support precautionary approaches, challenge any identified inequities, and work with our community partners to develop community-led decisions. Our mission and our staff directly support the protection of people and the environment, but with an EJ lens from which to view our work. Next slide. Our program is guided by the principles that focus on the foundational ideal of fairness and equity and help us advance environmental justice in our most vulnerable communities with a focus on collaborating with our community organizations and EJ groups, and also working with our internal programs on the concerns and recommendations brought to us from these EJ and community organizations. We work in partnership with our programs to establish open and trust-based relationships on environmental justice and community groups to provide them with information and access to staff and DTSC's decision-making process so they are informed about DTSC's activities. We continue to look for opportunities to collaborate on projects and programs where the impact on those communities would be significant based on those activities by providing access to staff, information, resources, and open lines of interagency communication with other agencies within Cali or other BDO board department and offices within Cali, PA, and also other agencies that could potentially assist in addressing the community's concerns. Equity is key. By elevating the voices of community members and organizations in vulnerable communities, we ensure our commitment to fairness. Environmental justice is not just an air, land, and water issue. It's a consideration of multiple impacts, which include environmental burdens, public health, vulnerability, social, educational, and economic demographics of a community, and the unequal distribution of those burdens. Next slide. As our program continues to evolve and work in partnership with our communities, we will continue to provide support across our programs and promote community capacity with environmental justice and community groups. We will actively participate in local and regional environmental justice meetings, work groups, and consortiums to listen to the concerns of these communities. If anyone here is aware of any community-led meetings that you would like for myself or someone from my staff to attend, please feel free to reach out to me. We continue to seek for opportunities on how to use community and environmental justice data into DTSC's decisions and programs that will better serve the needs of the community, and coordinate with BDOs within Cali, PA, and other agencies to assist with assessing those burdens that DTSC does not have direct responsibility over when it's brought to our attention. Internally, with our programs, we identify where we could find opportunities to collaboratively develop strategies that advance environmental justice across the department with input from our EJ and community groups. In our commitment to fairness and equity, we will also continue to work with tribal governments to solicit input on how DTSC's work specifically impacts them or their cultural resources. Next slide. Now I will briefly discuss our other program, Tribal Affairs, which is directed by legislative and administrative requirements from Executive Order B 1011 from 2011 that requires state agencies to develop consultation policies like the one that we have at Cal EPA and also DTSC. Assembly Bill 52, which requires agencies to consult with Native American tribes that are historically and culturally affiliated with the land where projects are subject to the California Environmental Quality Act, or also known as CEQA. And Executive Order B 1519 that established the Truth and Healing Council to bear witness to, record, examine existing documentation of, and receive California Native American narratives regarding the historical relationship between the state of California and California Native American tribes. Our interagency guidance documents at Cal EPA with the Tribal Consultation Protocol and DTSC's Tribal Consultation Policy further strengthen our commitment to notify, communicate, and consult with all tribes that may be affected by the work that DTSC conducts and could potentially affect their tribal governments, communities, and sensitive tribal cultural resources. Our Tribal Affairs program is driven by our commitment to communicate, engage, and consult with sovereign tribal governments in California to ensure that their voices are heard and are incorporated into the work that DTSC oversees. Next slide, please. And lastly, I wanted to highlight another aspect of DTSC's commitment to equity and fairness through some of the work that our Office of Civil Rights has led. These efforts reflect our commitment to diversity, racial equity, and inclusion, and belonging across all levels of the organization, starting with listening to our workforce. We began conducting employee experience surveys in 2023 and 2026 that address workplace culture, inclusion, and belonging to ensure that all of our employee voices and concerns are heard and identify areas at DTSC where we can embed equity into our organizational framework. For transparency and accountability, our Office of Civil Rights is committed to transparency and accountability that reflects these values by providing ongoing diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging updates that fosters shared accountability and helps keep equity at the forefront of our organizational priorities. To strengthen our departmental collective understanding, we've implemented department-wide trainings that focus on advancing racial equity and creating inclusion for all, which help equip staff with the tools and knowledge to create an inclusive environment for staff and when collaborating with our external community partners and organizations. Ultimately, DTSC's commitment to uplifting the values of equity and fairness across our programs is reflected in the work that we do and better prepare our staff internally to understand the importance of the diverse and unique communities that we serve. And with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague Taryn from the Water Boards to speak on their environmental justice and equity initiatives. Taryn?
Thank you, Andres. The next slide, please. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Taryn Sahota. I'm a Senior Environmental Scientist Specialist with Division of Water Quality at the State Water Board. I work on matters related to environmental justice, racial equity, and tribal affairs. Today, I'll be providing an overview of the State Water Board's efforts in relation to these topics. Next slide, please. This presentation will give some of the background and context for our racial equity work, including our racial equity resolution, action plan, and legislation such as Assembly Bill 2108. I'll also provide a brief overview of some of the state board initiatives across different offices and divisions. Next slide, please. Racial equity is directly tied to the Water Board's work because research continues to show that race is the strongest predictor of access to safe and affordable drinking water and sanitation. To acknowledge and address racial inequities, the State Water Board adopted a resolution in 2021 condemning racism, xenophobia, bigotry, and racial injustice, and strengthening commitment to racial equity, diversity, inclusion, access, and anti-racism. This resolution is referred to as our Racial Equity Resolution, and it provides a foundation for the water boards to acknowledge and dismantle the racism embedded within our agency through a legacy of actions, including the distribution of water rights, inequitable access to clean water and sanitation, and impacts from historical redlining. The communities disproportionately affected by environmental pollution, poor water quality, lack of water availability, and high water and sewer rates are communities of color. And at the highest levels of burden in California are Hispanic and Black communities. The adoption of this resolution has helped to set the tone for the work we do and outline a path for both state and regional water boards to acknowledge and address the history of white supremacy and systemic racism in California that has led to ongoing injustices. Since the adoption of the Racial Equity Resolution, many of the regional water boards have since adopted their own racial equity resolutions as well. Next slide, please. Additionally, the resolution requires the implementation of a racial equity action plan. Between 2020 and 2023, State Water Board engaged with its employees, the public, and with California Native American tribes to develop a racial equity resolution and the associated racial equity action plan. The action plan includes 3 strategic directions. The first direction is focused on integrating racial equity and measuring impact. This includes infusing the racial equity resolution throughout the Water Board's policies, programs, and practices, and measuring progress towards goals and adapting when necessary. The second strategic direction is creating and maintaining spaces for inclusion and belonging. This includes addressing internal and external representation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color at all water boards levels and elevating overall understanding of racial equity. The third strategic direction is centered on activating community wisdom of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. This includes fostering open communications and incorporating knowledge and expertise from people of color and communities in our decision-making processes. The action plan incorporates and assigns actions for each state board office and division that work towards a future where race no longer predicts the access to or quality of water resources a person receives, where race is not a predictor of professional outcomes for our employees, and when we consistently apply a racial equity lens to our decision-making processes. Next slide, please. The action plan has been implemented since 2023. An annual report was published in 2024 to highlight the progress on actions assigned to each state board office and division. As of 2026, the 2025 annual report is being drafted, and the action plan will be updated with community input, tribal input, and staff input again. I will provide a few examples of actions assigned for different divisions throughout the presentation. Next slide, please. The water boards are also held accountable by legislation such as Assembly Bill 2108, which was approved in September of 2022. The bill adds water code requirements that are focused on environmental justice, disadvantaged communities, and tribal communities. Section 189.7 was added to the water code to focus on engaging in equitable, culturally relevant community outreach in regard to proposed discharges of waste that may have disproportionate impacts on water quality in disadvantaged communities or tribal communities. Section 13149.2 was added to the Water Code to require the development of analyses and findings that apply environmental justice objectives, goals, and policies adopted by the state board and the regional boards in a transparent and inclusive manner. These findings apply to specific adoptions and amendments, including water quality control plans, state water quality policy, and statewide or regional waste discharge requirements or waivers. Next slide, please. In general, the water boards have incorporated many more environmental justice and racial equity actions in recent years. In particular, there has been the expansion of engagement, media and press distribution, and use of racial equity tools, the incorporation of equity considerations into programmatic work, and increased environmental justice, racial equity, and tribal affairs coordination throughout the water boards. The water boards have also taken actions to ensure our workplace reflects our commitments both internally and externally. This includes efforts such as including racial equity in duty statements and monthly staff racial equity support lunches. These actions connect back to the strategic direction of creating and maintaining inclusive spaces and normalizing conversations and responsibilities related to environmental justice and racial equity. Next slide, please. So jumping into some of these work that specific divisions and offices are doing, the Office of Public Engagement, Equity, and Tribal Affairs primary purposes include removing barriers to participation for historically excluded communities and tribes through engagement and education on decision-making processes that impact their water resources, as well as developing a workforce that prioritizes equity inclusion, and community-based engagement. To address these goals, the office has been focused on developing equitable community engagement processes, racial equity trainings, and offering language accessibility and assistance in public meetings and workshops. As Andreas mentioned earlier, the water boards are also held to mandates, executive orders, and legislation that guide our work with tribes. This office provides support for our coordination with tribal governments. One of the current actions in process is updating our water board's tribal consultation policy and protocol. Next slide, please. The Office of Information Management and Analysis serves as a bridge between data collectors and users. Actions the office is working on include open and transparent water data management and sharing, collaborative monitoring efforts and water data initiatives, such as the Tribal Water Data Map, and the development of resources such as the Racial Equity Data Handbook, which provides guidance to staff on key practices that should be considered when undertaking a racial equity-focused data analysis. Next slide, please. The Division of Drinking Water is focused on public health through the regulation of public drinking water systems. In 2016, State Water Board adopted a resolution identifying the human right to water as a top priority and core value of the water boards. The resolution cements the water board's commitment to considering how its activities impact and advance the human right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water to support basic human needs. The human right to water is considered in actions taken by the water boards that pertain to sources of drinking water. The State Water Board's Division of Drinking Water, Division of Financial Assistance, and Office of Public Engagement, Equity, and Tribal Affairs work together to implement the Safe and Affordable Funding for Equity and Resilience Program, referred to as the SAFER program. SAFER's purpose is to ensure Californians who lack safe, adequate, and affordable drinking water receive it as quickly as possible, and that the water systems serving them establish sustainable solutions. In doing so, SAFER minimizes the disproportionate environmental burdens experienced by some communities and advances justice for all Californians. One of the actions assigned to the Division of Drinking Water includes incorporating a racial equity analysis into the annual Drinking Water Needs Assessment, which guides the implementation of the SAFER program. Next slide, please. The last division I'll be covering today is the Division of Water Quality. One of the actions assigned to the division in the action plan is identifying racial equity data gaps related to water quality to make sure the data we use is equitable and relevant. Additionally, the Division of Water Quality is focused on evaluating our programs and policies to align with the principles of environmental justice and racial equity. Addressing this goal includes the development of accountability metrics, implementing Assembly Bill 2108, and updating our processes to include racial equity and environmental justice data considerations. Next slide, please. Similar to many water boards offices, the Division of Water Quality formed our own team focused on implementing this work externally and internally. The team, called the Advancing Racial Equity Subcommittee, was established in 2024. The subcommittee is focused on operationalizing racial equity work by developing internal competency for all staff and evaluating data in programs with the racial equity lens, by accurately reporting and tracking progress towards the division's racial equity goals, and by leading coordination on these efforts throughout the water boards. Next slide, please. I also wanted to connect back to the topic today and take a moment to highlight some of the work done by the cleanup programs. This includes a tribal engagement task force, which is aimed at coordinating tribal outreach and engagement throughout the water boards in relation to the cleanup programs and feedback received from tribes. The program has also been conducting public workshops aimed to increase education and community input, and the program has been evaluating data with the racial equity lens, including looking at the effects of pollution today in historically redlined neighborhoods, which Steve will discuss more in his presentation later this afternoon. Next slide, please. Thank you all for listening. My contact information is included on this slide. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions related to this presentation or racial equity at the water boards. And with that, I will turn it back to Cheryl to introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Taryn. Next slide. All right. Next, we're going to have a community perspective brought to us by Lenny Siegel. And Lenny has been the executive director for the Center for Public Environmental Oversight since 1994. He is one of the American environmental movement's leading experts on both the vapor intrusion pathway and military facility contamination, having provided technical assistance to and visited scores of community organizations across the US. He has been writing about the semiconductor industry since the 1970s. For his organization, he runs 2 internet news groups, the Military Environmental Forum and the Brownfields Internet Forum, as well as activist discussion lists on both trichloroethylene and PFAS or forever chemicals. He has served or is serving on several ITRC, which is the Interstate Technology and Regulatory Council, work teams on environmental remediation, including vapor intrusion and PFAS. He also serves on a dozen National Research Council committees addressing military environmental issues. In July 2011, Siegel was awarded US EPA's Superfund Citizen of the Year Award for his work overseeing the Moffett Field MEW Superfund project, one of US EPA's earliest and largest vapor intrusion investigations. He also served as mayor of Mountain View, California in 2018. Lenny, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So I've been dealing with groundwater contamination here in Mountain View since the early 1980s, and vapor intrusion literally rose to the surface in around 2002, 2003. Next slide, please. The first community meeting that EPA organized drew about 400 people. As a result of what I learned in Mountain View, I started attending conferences, studying vapor intrusion, and gradually started traveling around the country to work with other communities with similar concerns. Next slide, please. So this is in Georgia. Interestingly, the organizers of this meeting, including the NAACP, found that the best place to get people to a community meeting was a storefront church. Next slide, please. This is more recent in Lincoln, California. This is a senior community where they have golf cart lanes next to the bike lanes. And it turned out that they said the best time to get people to a meeting was in the middle of the afternoon. Next slide, please. So although I'm mostly talking about community engagement here, when I talk to communities, I talk about regulator and consultant engagement. What are the things that communities need to know in dealing with the people who are responsible for carrying out the vapor intrusion response? So it's important for communities to have their own technical consultant because so much of the material that you look at is in technical terms, even scientific notation that people aren't used to, acronyms. And so the idea is not to just translate from Spanish to English, but translate technical speak into English. So if a community can get somebody to do that, similar to what I do, they're a much better part of the process. People also need to understand that there are only certain times in the cleanup process where your advice is going to be listened to. You can't do it too early or too late. Talked about community-friendly times and places for meetings. One of the things that it's not the same everywhere. You have to weigh the advantages and disadvantages of virtual meetings versus in-person meetings. I learned a long time ago that the most important part of an in-person meeting are the 15 minutes before and 15 minutes afterward when you can talk to the decision makers in an informal setting. And it's also important for communities to request as much raw data and draft documents they can so they aren't too late in the process. Next slide, please. So I recently worked on the Interstate Technology and Regulatory Council Vapor Intrusion Toolkit, which just came out. And this is, we have a great chapter on community engagement, which has a lot of material on the importance of, and how you do it to create a community engagement plan. I recommend that there's a lot of technical material in the entire guidance, but I strongly recommend the community engagement chapter in this document. Next slide, please. So we began in our chapter by pointing out that it's not only important to engage the public at environmental contamination sites, but generally at vapor intrusion sites, it's essential to have the people whose buildings you're going to be dealing with are part of the process. And they can, by denying access, they can stop the investigation in its tracks. Next slide, please. So I developed this circle I call the virtuous circle of trust for an EPA community engagement conference in 2011. And it grows out of my experience at Moffett Field, where the base commander, the Navy base commander, invited troublemakers like me to take part in the technical review committee. We were listened to, and because we were listened to, we felt empowered. We felt empowered. We made constructive suggestions, and as a result of those suggestions, we were listened to some more. So basically, trust is essential if you're going to engage the community in a useful way. The circle can go the other way. If people aren't listened to, they won't be constructive. Next slide, please. I drafted these paragraphs for the ITRC document. They were dropped at the last minute out of concern that it might offend some of our federal partners. But environmental justice is so important, as people have been saying, in dealing with vapor intrusion. And there are two reasons. One is that vapor intrusion sites or potential vapor intrusion sites are often clustered like in Southeast Los Angeles, where there are many businesses that pollute, that don't have environmental staff. And so you have disproportionate exposure by the community to potential vapor intrusion contaminants. But even when you don't, it's also important to recognize that people in environmental justice communities, while they may understand pollution, they don't have the expertise, they aren't familiar with the language, and they don't have the trust. So they may need more help in engaging in the process than in communities that are more educated and more empowered. Next slide, please. So one of the things that often comes up in environmental justice communities is that projects that are, let's say, brownfields projects, where there's a good project dealing with the property in question, nobody's spending a lot of time looking at the adjacent properties. And I've seen this from Brooklyn to San Francisco, where you've got a great investigation, but because the money is being paid for by a developer, the project is being paid for a developer, there's not a whole lot of work being done with the neighbors. So it's important to engage the neighbors in the investigation, because they may too be exposed to the contamination. Now, this actually isn't a brownfield site, it's a landfill in Southern California, and they documented high levels of vapor-forming chemicals along the boundary of the property, but the homes just beyond the boundary were never sampled for indoor air contamination, even though, to me, that was a logical outcome. Again, the problem is the structure of the program didn't look off-site. Next slide, please. This is from the ITRC document. It's important to recognize that the community doesn't just consist of single-family homeowners who are above a groundwater plume. There are all kinds of people who are potentially impacted. I'll give you a couple examples from here in Mountain View. I was recently contacted by a couple who are living in a rental property, a rental townhome, adjacent to one of our Superfund sites, and they wanted to know what the risk was, because they were thinking of buying. And I've been contacted by people in the past who owned a home nearby, and they had a 3-year-old, and they wanted to know whether the 3-year-old was safe. Or you have nearby another situation in which a developer was building a series of townhomes above contaminated soil gas, and his concern was just getting information from the regulators about what he needed to do as soon as possible because he was losing money every month the project was delayed. So you can have people who are congregants at churches, business owners, and all of them have their own concerns. So this table was designed to help people think about, what are the concerns of the public that you're dealing with? Because the public, as you know, isn't just one kind of person. Next slide, please. So here's some of the key issues that I talk to communities about. First is to help them understand that we used to call it the vapor intrusion pathway, not just vapor intrusion. And I thought that was helpful because, for example, I get contacted every once in a while from people in Brooklyn, New York, who say, I live 3 blocks from the boundary of the vapor intrusion study area. Should I be worried? And they think of, let's like radiation proximity, how close do you have to be to the contamination to be at risk? And I point out to them, it's not how close you are, it's whether there's a way for the water or the gas to move in such a way that you might be exposed. Another key thing that people don't always understand is soil gas. People don't even know what soil gas is. So when you start talking about soil gas levels, you have to explain, pores in the soil and where the gas is and how it moves in a different direction than the groundwater. Also, it's important because often you get very high levels of soil gas contamination reported that they have to understand that the PCE or TC attenuates as it rises to the surface. Now, I'm one of the people who argue for attenuation factors that maximize indoor air sampling. I'm always concerned when a site someone uses a calculation and a model to not sample the indoor air when there's contamination. Nevertheless, you have to make sure that people understand that the levels of soil gas reporting are much different than what you might find in the indoor air. I think most of you must be familiar with the challenge of background sources, particularly indoor chemicals that people may have in their homes or in their garages next door. And that's important to explain to people. There was a house in Mountain View where I wanted more work done. I think I wanted mitigation, but it turned out they had a gun cleaner in the closet, and that was accounted for the contamination. So you have to not only make sure that people understand that, but if you're in a situation and let's say you're a regulator for groundwater and soil gas and indoor air, that if you find something and the problem is not something that's in your jurisdiction, make sure you point people to someone who can help them sort out what to do. Don't just say, I'm sorry, that's not my problem. They need to understand what they can do to eliminate these background sources from their homes. If you're familiar with subslab depressurization systems, often people think of those as venting the hazardous chemicals to the environment, to the outdoor air. And they do that in most cases. But the thing that I try to get across to people is the subslab depressurization system reverses the flow from upward to downward. So that even if there is a gap, a crack, some sort of a pathway between the subsurface and the indoor air, that the flow is going to be downward. People often talk about how this contamination got me sick. And that's not the way it works. I try to explain it may unacceptably increase your risk of a health problem as a result of the exposure, but not everybody who's exposed gets sick, and not everybody who gets sick got exposed. So it's a challenge, but you're talking about percentage risk, not just, again, automatically you got exposed. There's TCE in your home, and therefore you're going to get sick. And finally, key issue is long-term management, and that is if you put in a subslab depressurization system, then it's important that people know that needs to continue to operate as long as the contamination is present. You need to know that if you have a building that you couldn't investigate because the owner or renter wouldn't allow you in, that when the ownership changes, there needs to be a way to go back to that property and get it sampled. So there are many aspects of long-term management. Usually you don't think of those because they're in the future, but that's an important part of the response at vapor intrusion sites. Next slide, please. And one of the ways to deal with the challenge of long-term management is to do a permanent cleanup. Some of you may be aware that on March 17th in San Diego at the AEHS conference, EPA is doing another workshop on vapor intrusion. This will be one of the topics. The idea is when you can remediate the groundwater and or the soil gas, that's more permanent than putting in a vapor intrusion mitigation system. It's not always the best thing to do, but there are multiple advantages. First, we're talking about these environmental justice areas, areas where there are multiple sources of contamination and multiple residents. It's much easier if you have sort of an area-wide holistic approach. You have a common map of the contamination and you try to eliminate the contamination, perhaps from a public right-of-way, that it's easier to address. It definitely reduces the amount of work if you focus on the natural environment. You don't have to go around trying to contact people, get them to sign access agreements, explaining everything to them. You still want to do public outreach, but if you approach it as an area-wide remediation, you don't get tied up in the time-consuming process of getting access agreements and arranging a time to visit people and making sure that their cat doesn't get out or their lawn doesn't get damaged when you're on the property. There's less operation and maintenance because it's more centralized if you have, let's say, for a soil vapor extraction system, as opposed to many individual sub-slab depressurization systems. If you're focusing on the source, the groundwater and the soil gas in your sampling, maybe you don't need to do as much as if you were sampling indoor air. I've seen in presentations about how many times a year you need to sample indoor air to make sure you capture the reasonable maximum exposure. So, and I also mentioned the developer in my community. If you actually get a clean closure on a site, then you've eliminated obstacles to development and obstacles to financing. And finally, the soil vapor extraction and some of the groundwater treatment, instead of pulling contamination towards living spaces, would pull it away from them. So this is a strategy, again, not looking at individual buildings, but doing full remediation. That's kind of what we try to do if we're focused on groundwater and drinking water exposures. And I think if you attend the EPA workshop, you'll learn some of the more technical studies they've done to justify how this approach might work, at least in many cases. So that's pretty much it. Again, communities are essential. Next slide, please. Communities are essential to vapor intrusion responses. People want to know what's going on, and if you treat them right, they'll be constructive participants in the process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lenny. We'll now start a 5-minute Q&A session if you have questions specifically for Lenny. And just to remind you, there will be another Q&A session at the end of all the presentations if you have general questions or comments for the workshop as a whole. So if anyone has questions specifically for Lenny, let's go to the next slide and review the logistics. You can either use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to type in the question, or use the raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen also. And I will start calling on people in the order of the hand. Please ask only one question at a time. We won't be using the chat function. And if you are on the phone, use *9 to raise your hand. And when I call on you, *6 to mute or unmute. There's one question that came in through the Q&A feature, Lenny, that I think you might have a nice perspective on. Sometimes vulnerable community members are trapped between competing interests. Landlords may not want to potentially lower their property value by allowing testing when they have a tenant or multiple tenants or properties with guaranteed Section 8 income. If tenants want indoor air testing, the landlord or HOA may have an interest that conflicts with ensuring clean air. Being evicted or homeless is a constant fear for some socioeconomically challenged areas. Any techniques or info to get that testing?
So I've run across that, particularly in New York City. But we had that problem once in Mountain View, where a major apartment owner was denying EPA access to do indoor air testing. And this is a developer who wanted, apartment owner who wanted to do more development in the city. And we basically took it to the press. And so that when the public knew that this landlord, who was highly visible, was unwilling to cooperate, they backtracked immediately and said, "Oh no, that wasn't the case." But it is a challenge. Most state agencies won't force an apartment owner to open up the building for sampling, but ideally that's the case. The other thing, because the property value issue is also for people who own their own homes. What I like to point out is that if a home is sampled and comes up clean, then you don't have to worry about property values. And if it's sampled and comes up dirty and it's treated, that's going to bring the property values, assure that the property values are okay. Whereas if you're in an area that you know there's contamination, there's been no sampling or no response, you're taking a chance with the property values. So it can serve the owner of the property to have the sampling done and, if necessary, the mitigation.
Great, thank you. Another question asks if you can describe your experience in the variety of sites that you have been involved with. Is it mostly NPL, infill affected by a single source, complex multiple sites, commingled contamination? As
All
not
of
all
the above.
Okay. As not all situations look like a Superfund site or have responsible and solvent property owners, how do you balance your participation at sites given the variety of situations where your expertise was requested? Also, for the sites you're involved in, how much more would complete remediation have cost?
Well, the last one I don't know. The cost varies by site. There's a site in San Francisco where there are two potential historic sources, and the neighborhood geologist calculated that the cost of soil vapor extraction, because there's no groundwater contamination, would be less than vapor mitigation and long-term management. But that's a unique situation where the soil's all sand and there's no groundwater contamination. Often the role of the community group, when they're called to a community meeting about one site, and then as they learn more about it, they realize that there are other sites in the area, is for the community group to urge the agency or agencies responsible for the cleanup to deal with them holistically, to not just do the buildings one at a time. So here in Mountain View, where we have Superfund for the birthplace of the semiconductor industry, we have many sources, and having all those sources treated by the same regulators at the same time really helps. Whereas, let's say Alhambra, where you've got 3 different regulatory agencies and multiple sources, it's been more challenging, and that's one of the sites where I was concerned about the potential for off-site contamination because the railroad tracks don't serve as a barrier for vapor contamination.
Great, thank you, Lenny. There's a follow-up question about public awareness campaigns, and there's asking for examples of campaigns that have been successful in the past to mobilize communities and hold polluters accountable, e.g. digital physical newspapers, social media campaigns, or documentaries. I think it's really a question of how do you go about this? What are the tools?
Well, it's changing because social media is so important these days. There's a site in North Carolina where there was contamination threatening a school, and panic spread at the speed of Facebook. And turned out the problem wasn't that big. The state got sampling, or maybe it was the school district got sampling done really quickly, and there wasn't a threat to the students. But the information spread so quickly that they still closed the schools because there was so much panic. So the main thing is you have to act quickly for people to understand what's going on. So on the one hand, I'm telling communities, make sure you're sampled, make sure that people are figuring out what needs to be done, but don't panic. I once went on TV warning that the teachers at a school in Sunnyvale had to worry about exposure to vapor contamination because of the threat to pregnant women. And I was called by a pregnant teacher the next day. And I learned to be more careful about what I say, that it's not that every pregnant teacher in the schools in this area is at risk, but you at least should be aware of the risk. Talk to your doctor to make sure that you're comfortable with the situation. So you have to balance making sure people know that it's a potential problem and not panicking them, because not everybody's going to fall over and die because there's TCE in the neighborhood.
Great. Thank you, Lenny. There's another follow-up about the question about landlords. And the question is, any strategies for getting indoor air tests when you know that there's high levels in public areas, but you're having trouble getting access to individual tenant spaces or properties or individual homes?
So that's where the strategy of remediation of the area comes up, where you don't need access. You've got high levels in the soil gas. You know there's a potential problem. You aren't sure that every unit has a problem, but if you treat the soil gas, you sample the soil gas from public rights of way, you put in a soil vapor extraction system, you get a protective result without wondering how many actual units you get to sample indoors. Ideally, you would pressure the landlords to do it, but again, focusing on remediation is a good strategy, not only in the long term, but in the short term.
All right. I see a couple more questions in the chat, but they're, I think, broader and for the whole work group. So if there's any other questions, raise your hand or we'll head to a 5-minute break. Okay, seeing no immediate hands raised, let's take a 5-minute break and we'll rejoin at 2:13. Thank you. Okay, I think it's been 5 minutes. Time to get back to it. I hope you all had a chance to get a sip of water or whatever you needed to do to be refreshed and focused. Can I have the next slide? Okay, so the next item on our list is the Water Board's cleanup programs, and I will turn the presentation over to Steve McMasters.
Hello and good afternoon, everybody. Next slide, please. Let's get my opening slide. So awesome that you're all here today and letting us share some of our statewide initiatives and helping you understand how our agencies are looking at communities and the roles that we play. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Steve McMasters. I've been with the Water Board since 2007 and involved with the Cali PA Vapor Intrusion Work Group since 2014, when the short-term TCE, short-term action levels became an issue that we needed to address. My role here today is I'm a supervising engineering geologist and lead with our division on the cleanup programs, but also our UST prevention program. And that includes our site cleanup, our DOD, and UST programs. And since we're talking cleanup programs, next slide, please. So my goal today is to share with you all how our contaminated sites impact the state of California, in particular our burden communities. We're hopeful that this gives you a little bit of insight on the programmatic evaluations we commonly do for our programs here at the State Water Board. By sharing this information and having our open dialogue and the Q&A sessions that we have, it does present an opportunity for us to evaluate and reflect on our cleanup programs. It also provides an opportunity for us to refine our efforts and to help serve all the communities in the state. Next slide, please. So as a refresher, and I do believe Rashani, as part of the VI Basics, if you did attend that one, did give you a pretty in-depth discussion on the cleanup programs, but I will share that again a little bit with you. So the water boards do implement 3 cleanup programs, including the underground storage tank or UST program, the site cleanup program, and our Department of Defense program. DTSC also implements their site mitigation program, and we often jointly oversee many DoD facilities. So implementation of all these programs all have the underlying goal for protection of human health, safety, and the environment. But for today's discussion, we will be just focusing on the Water Board's UST and site cleanup program, as these 2 programs have a much broader impact to the state. So next slide, please. So I did want to provide just a little bit more detail on the UST and site cleanup program. The UST program focuses primarily on the petroleum USTs. As of December last year, we had over 1,200 open cases. That number is actually increasing a little bit due to the single wall removals that is happening throughout the state. For all of our UST sites, petroleum and other hazardous substances, they must be overseen by our 9 regional water quality control boards or certified local agencies within the Water Board's local oversight program. This program has been very successful of cleanup and closure of over 42,000 sites statewide, primarily due to the robust funding, but also the relatively ease investigation and cleanup efforts. And I say that, in quotes, the relative there. As for the site cleanup program, as of December last year, we had about 55 open cases statewide, which include cases overseen by 9 regional water boards or by our local agencies enrolled in the self-certified AB 304 program. The site cleanup program I often call the potpourri program, as we oversee all types of contamination and release types. Unfortunately, we have not seen the same cleanup and closure rates as the UST program, as we typically deal with funding limitations, higher risk contaminants, including our chlorinated solvents, and much more complex investigations. I think I saw a question about DNAPL. Yeah, we're talking about DNAPL, or dense non-aqueous phase liquids, typically with the chlorinated sites. So before I get into the analysis of these programs, I did want you to take a look. Do I have somebody? I hear somebody unmuted. Make sure you mute, please. Thank you. Okay, so before I get into the analysis programs, please take a look at the map to the right. As you can see, we have a high population of our open cases in urbanized areas and along highway corridors. And I did want to make that disclaimer that the data set that we're talking about today and the analysis that I'm going to share with you shortly is not the full picture, as we only include sites within our GeoTracker database. Many sites that predate a GeoTracker requirements are not included, nor are the sites that we're not aware about. There are a large number of potentially contaminated sites in the state of California that our agencies have not been involved. Additionally, DTSC sites are not shown, primarily because I don't have readily access to that data set. So next slide, please. So why is vapor intrusion important to our cleanup sites? First, our primary contaminants we routinely work on are volatile in nature and will continue to present a vapor intrusion risk if not controlled. For us to understand vapor behavior in the overall conceptual site model, we need those appropriate samples to help us fill in those blanks so we can make appropriate decisions for a site. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to jump in now into our statewide analysis we did for the 2 water board cleanup programs. So for us to evaluate the statewide impact to our burden communities and population groups, we used 2 primary data sets. First, we used the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or a WEHA's CalEnviro Screen 4.0 tool. We use a standard of anything with a 75% or greater CalEnviroScreen score, CS score, to define a burden community. Second, for us to evaluate the impact to our population or race groups, we use the federal census data from the self-reported 2022 census tracts. Before I move on, I did want to give it a shout out to one of our new staff in our section, Alice Kwok, for I think she's titled Engineering Geologist Extraordinaire, but she did a lot of the GIS work to help us with this analysis today that I'm sharing with you. For those of you that are not familiar with CalEnviroScreen, its scoring is based upon multiple criteria within two general categories. Oh, next slide. I'm sorry about that. Next slide. There we go. Thank you. First, we have the pollution burden that allocates multiple exposure types, such as ozone concentration, drinking water contaminants, toxic releases, and we also have the environmental effects, such as the number of cleanup sites and identified hazardous waste sites through the area. I'm just kind of touching on this a little bit. Second, CalEnviroScreen scoring is also based upon population characteristics, such as sensitive population groups, such as the percent of cardiovascular disease within a certain area. It also accounts for socioeconomic factors such as low-income households, unemployment, and poverty. I don't have a lot of time today to explain further all the inputs to CalEnviroScreen, nor I am an expert in all this criteria, but it is a common tool that we use here in our agencies to evaluate environmental justice issues. I have asked the moderators to include a link to the website for your reference today, so hopefully that's in the chat. So you may ask, how do our cleanup programs fall within these areas of the state? Well, I have the data for you. So this graph represents the cumulative total of approximately, thank you for advancing the slide, cumulative total of approximately 60,000 historic and existing cleanup sites that under the Water Board's umbrella. Those identified in the red are within those areas designated with a CES score of 75% or greater, so within those most burdened areas of the state, where everything in blue are below that 75%. So as you can see, for our two cleanup programs, roughly 1/3 or roughly 18,000 sites of our historic and existing or open cleanup sites reside within those most burdened areas of the state. Next slide, please. Now, if we dive a little bit deeper into our existing open cases, these are the open cases only. This graph shows the distribution of our open cases as compared to CalEnviroScreen scores. Please note, I used the same kind of coloring for anything above 75% is in red, anything below is in blue. You will also note that as the CES score increases, we are seeing more open cases towards those most burdened areas of the state. Next slide, please. I'm now going to transition into the population and race demographics of the state of California and how our cleanup programs relate. So the graph you see before you is the breakdown of different population groups throughout the state of California based upon that 2022 census tract. I offer this figure as a baseline as I share the following slides in that statewide analysis that we do. So I did want to point out that a few of the population groups showed on this graph, including Native Hawaiian, American Indian, Alaskan, 2 or more races, and other races shown on this graph. We did not identify any cleanup sites within these areas, so they're not part of our study and the data I'm about to share with you. Okay, next slide. So for our cleanup sites, both existing and closed, the majority reside within the predominant Hispanic and white communities, with less numbers for Asian and African American communities. This is relatively similar to the general population groups for the state. So for the statewide map on the right, we definitely see some overall trends in our cleanup sites for Northern California, along Central Valley, and within our urbanized areas in Bay Area and Southern California. Next slide, please. Now, if we dive in a little bit and just focus to the sites within those most burdened areas of the state, identified by the CalEnviroScreen score of 75% or greater, there is a definite disparity as compared to the entire data set. In fact, for the most burdened areas of the state, the Hispanic and Latino communities are impacted significantly. This definitely stood out when I first saw this data when we started playing with this information about 2 years ago. With that, within our predominant African American communities, we do see a slight increase in the overall percent from 2 to 4 when we compare that statewide average. On the previous slide, now we're looking at just within these areas, we're seeing an increase from 2 to 4%, where we see a decrease in the impact for our Asian communities from 10 to 5%, and a significant lesser impact for the predominant white communities from 48 down to 12%. Next slide, please. I do want to jump in to a bit of controversial issue to help explain historic systemic policies amongst government agencies can affect our population. So as part of the 1930s New Deal efforts to get us out of the Great Depression, the federal government established the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which targeted multiple cities throughout the nation, including 8 cities within California, including San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, Los Angeles, Sacramento, Stockton, Fresno, and San Diego, for the purpose of allowing and also denying access to home loans within key areas, in particular for certain population groups and people of color. This federal housing policy graded each of these areas based on riskiness or residential security for banks and lenders, and graded them with the following classifications. A, represented as green as the best or least risky to that residential security. B, represented in blue as desirable. C, represented in yellow as declining or an increasing risk. And then lastly, we have D, represented in red as qualified as hazardous to lenders and banks. The unfortunate result of this redlining practice caused the concentration of African Americans and other population groups into areas with heavy industrial activities, which definitely corresponds with our cleanup sites. Next slide, please. So if you'd like to learn more information about the historic redlining practice, we do have a couple of resources for you that do a much better job than me explaining this historic systemic practice. And they do include the University of Richmond, and also Cali, PA themselves does have the pollution and prejudice GIS story map. And I have asked the moderators to include both these links as part of the chat so you can get this information yourself. So where am I going with this? Well, next slide, please. Well, if you compare the cleanup sites with the designated homeowners loan corporation areas in the state, roughly 18% of our approximate 60,000 historic and existing sites reside within these areas as demonstrated on the left graph. In fact, about 5% or just under 3,000 of our cleanup sites reside directly within those historic red line areas, represented as the red portion on the left graph. Now, I did want to dive a little bit deeper and focus on the population groups specifically to those red line areas only, as shown on the graph to the right. So we do see the distribution that is fairly similar to that statewide average within those areas. But if you go to the next slide, please. I did take the liberty to evaluate this a little bit closer, for our cleanup sites within those red line areas to determine if there's any disparities between our open sites and closed sites as represented on the graphs before you. So the group of graphs on the top represent the number of open sites, whereas the group of graphs on the bottom represent the distribution of closed sites within those predominant population groups. We do observe disparity within the population groups. Ideally, we would like to see an equal percentage between open and closed sites for each population group, but we do not. We see a higher percent for African American and Asian groups for those remaining open sites. We see a relative equal percent for Hispanic areas and a lower percent for the predominant white areas of the state. So as of today, I cannot explain these disparities other than that they do exist. Understanding the why is the next phase of our analysis, and that understanding the why will be working with the regional boards and local agencies to try to understand this a little bit better. So next slide, please. So to conclude my presentation, I would like to summarize some of the key takeaways Vapor intrusion, yep, we're getting back to vapor intrusion, is one of the many concerns at our cleanup sites. If a vapor intrusion risk exists, we want to ensure that both the site and the community is protected. Roughly 1/3 of our open cleanup sites reside in those most burdened areas of the state. We do observe disparity in closures between the least and most burdened areas as identified from the Cal EnviroScreen scores. We also observe an increasing trend in the number of open cases as that CS score also increases. For the most burdened areas of the state, the Latino and Hispanic communities have had or do have the highest percent of cleanup sites. And within those historic red line areas of the state, there is disparity between population groups. Lastly, because of all these disparities, they do demonstrate that more work and statewide efforts are needed to help us balance our programs better so we can serve all communities in the state. So with that, let's go to my last, and this is my contact information. If you would like to reach out to me, I'm more than happy to have some more in-depth discussion with you on a personal basis. So here's my contact information. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Next slide. Next up, we have DTSC's cleanup programs, and I will turn the presentation over to Natasha DiPietro and Jen Stackhouse.
Thank you, Cheryl. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Natasha DiPietro, and I serve as a senior geologist with DTSC. Today, Jen and I will talk about a new approach we're implementing at DTSC called Community Considerate Cleanups, or C3. This concept was developed based on feedback from community members and advisory councils. The goal is to set expectations early and make sure cleanups are designed with the community in mind, not just the technical requirements. So we'll use C3 language and tools throughout the presentation so you can see how it works in practice. Next slide, please. So what does this mean? Community considerate cleanup aims to look at the cleanup project through the lens of the people who live, work, play, and learn in the area of the cleanup. It also considers the communities where waste might be transported for treatment or disposal. So in short, it's about making decisions as part of the cleanup that respect and reflect community needs and concerns. Next slide, please. C3 integrates 3 key elements. It integrates environmental justice, public participation, and project management. And these aren't just separate boxes to check. They all work together. Environmental justice ensures that we're addressing disproportionate impacts. Public participation means meaningful engagement, not just formal notices. And project management ties it all together. So under this framework, these considerations are built into the cleanup process from the start. Next slide, please. Our goals under this new framework are to help communities understand what's happening in their neighborhoods during cleanups, for us to make deliberate and thoughtful choices about cleanup methods and implementation, and to provide clear and consistent communication. So traditionally, public participation aimed for agreement on a selected alternative, and we're shifting to a new normal, which is focusing on understanding what is being done and why. So we'll explain, listen, and respond in plain language. We'll evaluate alternatives with community impacts in mind, and we'll work to minimize dust, noise, traffic, and disruption during cleanup. And because vapor intrusion work often requires access to buildings, community engagement is essential. We simply can't do this work without the collaboration from tenants and property owners. Next slide, please. So how do you design a C3 cleanup plan? We start by sharing cleanup details in an audience-driven way, not just using technical jargon. We will include a plain language section that explains how the cleanup impacts the community, and we'll talk a little bit more about this next. We also actively engage, we share expertise, and most importantly, we ask ourselves, Would a community member understand what's happening in their neighborhood? That's our North Star. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, one notable change that is a major part of this framework is a new section to be added to the beginning of a cleanup plan that is called the Community Considerations in the Cleanup Summary, or the C3 Summary. So like I said, this is a new section that will be requesting consultants add to cleanup plans that is written in plain language and not technical jargon. In general, the section should aim to answer the following questions. Why is the cleanup necessary? How will people be protected during the cleanup? What will happen in my neighborhood during and after the cleanup? How can a community member stay informed about the cleanup? Is my drinking water safe? Is the air safe to breathe? Can I eat the fruit and vegetables grown at my home? And who can I contact if I have a concern? So for our practitioners on the line, it's important to understand that these are common questions we receive during public comment period, and the goal is to provide clear and direct information that the community is interested in. The C3 summary section should also be adjusted based on information that's gathered during all the community engagement activities. So again, the goal is really just to provide answers to some common questions, creating transparency and providing a dedicated section that is written for community members in the cleanup plan. This increases awareness of the cleanup plan, of the cleanup that's taking place in their neighborhood. Now I'll hand it off to my colleague Jen to talk about a couple more C3 enhancements that can be added to projects. Next slide, please.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Hello, everyone. My name is Jen Stackhouse, and I serve as a toxicologist with the Department of Toxic Substances Control in the Human and Ecological Risk Office, also known as HERO. My passion is community health. In fact, I've dedicated over 20 years studying how chemicals move in the environment and how they impact human health. Next slide, please. Through my research and service at DTSC, I've had a chance to listen and learn from community members about their concerns with vapor intrusion. Today, I would like to share a few of those concerns with you. As we have heard from previous presenters, vapor intrusion is complicated. The science behind it is hard to understand. It's very technical and complex. Vapor intrusion first became a concern for homes back in the 1980s, over 40 years ago, after houses were built on top of an old waste dump in Niagara Falls, New York. Even today, scientists and regulators across the nation and the world are still learning more about vapor intrusion. One of the biggest questions that community members have for us is, could vapor intrusion be happening inside my home? Most of the time, you can't see, smell, or feel these vapors. One common exception is gasoline. You could usually smell it, and years ago, you could even see the vapors at gas stations before the nozzles were changed. With soil and water, it's easy to protect yourself. If they're contaminated, you can wash your hands after touching soil, use raised garden beds, drink bottled filtered water, but with air, it's just different. We can't stop breathing. To check for vapor intrusion, we often need to test the air inside homes and businesses before sampling. We also need to understand what other vapors might be present that are not from vapor intrusion. This often means looking for items such as cleaning supplies, paints, or chemicals that are often stored in kitchens, in bathrooms, or in garages. This process also often feels invasive, as your home is your safe space, where you raise your family, and the place where you feel most comfortable and protected. Next slide, please. So listening and learning from you, the community, and your voices are important. C3 enhancements to a project can mean attending or hosting site walks, connecting with city planning offices, connecting with community-based organizations, and engaging the community through neighborhood meetings such as HOA meetings. We even brought up PTA meetings, religious institutions, senior centers, and through social media. For larger sites, we might want to use open houses or community action groups. For smaller sites, sensitive sites, or even for sites where we may need to install mitigation systems on an occupied home, One-on-one meetings may work best. The approach for meetings should depend on the community's needs, and we're committed to meeting the community where they are at. These suggested pre-enhancements should occur. Thanks for having us today. Should occur early in the project and often, well before the cleanup plan is being drafted. This will help inform the design of the community cleanup plan and any additional community engagement that should be considered throughout the project lifecycle. Next slide, please. So once we move into the cleanup planning phase, community engagement continues. This process includes some of the more common community engagement methods that you might be familiar with, such as the community surveys and profiles, fact sheets that are mailed to residents or distributed, public comment periods, and notice on draft public documents or cleanup plans, and public meetings if needed. However, one thing that's new in the C3 process is a community feedback report, which highlights how the community or public input was considered. The community feedback report should include how DTSC shared information on the cleanup, how the community responded, examples such as numbers of calls or emails or written comments that were received, and a summary of the main concerns from the community, and how DTSC will modify the cleanup plan based on input and comments received from the community. We hope that this process will increase transparency and trust in the cleanup process. Next slide, please. So many of you may be asking, why are we doing this? Why are we using the C3 model? Well, we are using the C3 framework as it aims to move us beyond the check-in-the-box engagement. The aim and goal is to help communities understand what is happening and how to build trust through transparency and integrate community voices by meeting people where they are. It is also important to note that the C3 framework and these components, like the C3 summary section and the pre-engagement, are not necessarily required, but DTSC views them as best practices, and the goal is to provide clear information and really understand what the concerns are from the community, which will hopefully lead to a better cleanup. Next slide, please. To learn more about community considerate cleanups, please visit the DTSC website, www.dtsc.ca.gov/C3C. A link to this website has also been dropped in the webinar Zoom chat for your use. Additionally, please feel free to reach out to either myself, Natasha, or Miriam Tasnif-Abassi if anyone would like to sit down and collaborate on how you can incorporate C3 enhancements into your workspace. We would happily help you set up a C3 program that is tailored to your needs. Next slide, please. So here is our contact information, mine and Natasha's. I hope these presentations have been helpful. We look forward to continuing our vapor intrusion journey with you all. Please note that the next workshop is scheduled for March 10th, 2026 from 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m., which is titled Vapor Intrusion Holistic Part 1, Conceptual Site Model and Best Practices. This workshop will include presentations and case studies from the Cal EPA VI Workgroup team, members, and environmental consultants on developing conceptual site models, also known as CSMs, and best practices for sites with potential vapor intrusion concerns. We hope to see you all there. I would now like to invite Cheryl Prowl to transition us into our question and answer open discussion portion of this workshop.
Great, thank you so much, Jen. Next slide, please. Okay, as Jen said, next we're going to go into open discussion. Next slide. And one more. To review the logistics, it's just like what we did when we did the Q&A for Lenny. Feel free to type questions in the Q&A feature by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you do type in the question, we may provide a written answer or answer it verbally as time allows. If you would like to verbally ask a question, please use the raised hand icon, and I will call on people in the order that I see raised hands. And we do ask that you ask only one question at a time. We do have a rather large group, so we would like you to limit your questions to 2 to 3 minutes. And they can be questions, or if you have just feedback or comments for us, we welcome that as well. And if you are joining us on the phone, you can participate as well. Press *9 to raise your hand, and then when we call on you, it's *6 to mute or unmute. And next slide. Just to get the juices flowing of things that we've thought about that we might like to discuss, here are some guiding questions. You don't have to provide comments or feedback on any of these, but it's some ideas to get your thoughts flowing. What is working well to communicate and work with communities during investigation and cleanup of contaminated properties? How can we as regulators improve? How would you want to be informed if you were considering moving to a property that had been cleaned up or mitigated? Would it impact your decision to move there? Are there tools for risk communication that are needed? And next steps, where should we focus our attention to continue to improve investigation and cleanup of contaminated properties to better support communities? And I'm going to start our Q&A by inviting Amanda Palumbo, our OEHA colleague, to come and tell us just a little bit about EnviroScreen 5.0, which came out as we were in the process of preparing this presentation.
Thanks, Cheryl. So yeah, just a reminder that the OEHA Cal EnviroScreen team is updating Cal EnviroScreen, and so that's the environmental justice mapping tool that Steve McMasters was talking about. They're adding new indicators on diabetes and small facilities with air emissions. They're also making some other smaller changes to some of the existing indicators. So the public comment period is open until April 1st. And so, yeah, if you have any interest in that, I encourage you to take a look and please send the Cal EnviroScreen team your comments. The link to that is going to be put in the chat where you can find the information and where you can send your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, the first person that I see with their hand raised is Larry Leroy Ladd. And you should have the ability to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I live out in Ranch Cordova at the Airjet Superfund site. Been messing around with it for 25 years. So 3 quick comments of what I picked up over the years. One thing I'm lobbying for is from the data from TC exposed Chinese workers, an assay, medical assay that is used now to evaluate treatment is B-cell maturation antigen at orders of magnitude higher of what it needs to be to detect TCE exposure. So if you have abnormally low B-cell maturation antigen, then that's a sign of TCE exposure along with the more common kidney and liver signs. So that's item number 1 that I'm pursuing. Number 2, hematologist asked me, who's most vulnerable to TCE exposure? And so I looked at it for a year and I said, my best guess as a layman is somebody who's experiencing symptoms of lupus secondary to A20 haploinsufficiency. And then after that, the HIV positive. And third and final, in terms of creative or relieving anxiety, especially since there's lots of open areas out at Aerojet, I'm going to try and tap the expertise at the veterinary program at UC Davis and learn more about the possibility of using open range chickens, since the debate about TC toxicity and fetal heart defects is, can humans be as sensitive as a chicken? That's well, why not use chickens as a sentinel animal? And the other new thing is golden retrievers and lymphoma risk. So those are my wild and crazy ideas I'm throwing out to you all, the professionals.
Thank you so much for that, Larry. That gives us some things to think about. And I am not seeing any other questions. Oh, I see Lenny Siegel. Lenny, did you want to respond or ask your own question?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on the discussion in the Q&A on development. It's really important for regulatory agencies and local planning jurisdictions to coordinate closely. You can have good experiences and bad experiences. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the local government ignored or was not in touch with the state regulators, and they allowed occupancy of a building that still had vapor intrusion. It had to be evacuated. There's a big splash in the news for weeks. On the other hand, in Mountain View, when I was on the council, we were able to move forward a development in order to have the developers pay for contamination that not only affected the property they were developing, but the adjacent properties in Sunnyvale, which had vapor intrusion mitigation systems. And we knew from the start, DTSC had evaluated the site. We knew what was required to be done. And that was the actual development that allowed the construction to, the cleanup to happen.
Great. Thank you for that perspective, Lenny. Next, I'm going to ask Ambar Rivera to unmute. And after her, it will be Jennifer Seitz. Ambar, you should be able to unmute.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Ambar Rivera. I'm a staff researcher at Communities for a Better Environment. I've been following this work group since last year, and I feel like I always learn something new. So I really appreciate the space and opportunities for this type of work. The first question is just like what's working well or what needs to be improved. I think that there's just like it's kind of like hot potato sometimes with the agencies and when it comes to like contamination. And I also feel like it seems like, and I'm talking to a personal experience right now, honestly, but I think an improvement is that, regardless of a development going through a voluntary agreement or CLARA or whatever, it's kind of like they're just washing their hands sometimes, because they're like, well, I'm doing this agreement with an agency to do a cleanup. And their cleanup's only focused on the parcel where the redevelopment's occurring. But we find out through their documents that the area in general, not just the site, but like next door, below, above, all around, it's really contaminated, right? As we saw in the presentations from Stephen and Lenny, it's like there's a lot of pollution in these high burden areas, right? EJ communities. And I think that my experience with this is that, we learned that, yeah, they have solutions, they have mitigations, but how effective are these mitigation strategies when the business next door is going through so much contamination, but because they're not going through their own like CLARA agreement, they're just kind of like, yeah, we're gonna do our own thing. Like pretty much like how do you comprehensive cleanup when it's just piecemealing properties, And it's been really difficult to tell members like this is just kind of like the policy, right? So unfortunately, the law is only going to help communities to a certain extent, despite so much data and proof like that there's a lot of contamination. So I think that's how it can be improvement. It's not just like, more communication. It's like, no, we're getting info, but when we give feedback, the agencies are just kind of like scrambling, right? Because how is it that DTSC is mostly focused on soil and some groundwater, but then water board's like for sure groundwater, but these two sites are right next door. And by right next door, I mean like it's behind me. It's just behind my back. I think there needs to be more collaboration with the agencies if there's projects, regardless if it's going through water board or DTSC, like there needs to be more communication. Maybe there should be another EnviroStor geotracker that combines everyone's work together. So we're more aware of what's going on the floor. Like y'all said, lived experience, right? Like Katie Butler said earlier. Like we're on the floor here. Y'all see it through the data dashboards and the site visits, cool, but you're not living it. And when we see it and we try to report back to agencies, we're trying to go over here, talk to them. It's because of this, or yeah, there needs to be improvement on that. It's really difficult to even just it's just challenging. It's really challenging and it sucks to see like you have all this data that's done by really good people like geologists, engineers, and they're telling us it's really contaminated, but because you can only clean it up to a certain level and we can't impose on private properties, right? Or access agreements, right? It's just really challenging. It's like there's such a big focus on private property rather than health as a whole, right? Because you can prevent these issues like in Lenny's presentation, right? It's like just clean it up all as much as you can, like really well now. There won't be issues going forward. But it's really challenging. And we really want to work with the agencies, right? Like we said, we have the lived experience. We're here on the floor. we experience it and we just want something to be done about it. And I understand it can get messy, right? Um, yeah, sorry. Check. Thank you.
Thank you. And I really appreciate your perspective. If you do feel like you're getting the runaround from any regulator, feel free to reach out to anyone on the team who provided their contact info or the general vapor intrusion inbox, even if it's not a vapor intrusion issue. We've got a great team between both the Water Board, DTSC, and OEHA. We'll track down who's involved in the particular cases and make sure that we're coordinating. And I think Ben Stanfill wanted to comment as well.
Yeah, and I just also want to acknowledge, some of the challenges around vapor intrusion. Lenny talked about, other folks have talked about that the contamination doesn't stop at a property line, and really looking at things semi-regionally or in the surrounding area is something that, the eight we're aware of. We're working through how we can do that better. Every site's a little bit different, but I really appreciate your sharing your experience and how challenging that's been from the community's perspective, and how we as, DTSC and the water boards can really look at that better, because there are just some legal limitations we have around looking at things parcel by parcel. But it's also gives us some challenges when working on vapor intrusion cases, especially.
Great. Thank you, Ben. And now the next hand that I see is Jennifer Seitz. And please let me know if I'm saying that wrong. And I don't see hands after that. So if you have questions, formulate them and raise your hand. Jennifer, I will allow you to unmute.
Thank you, and you pronounced my last name correctly. So this question in mind is for when we're dealing with clients who have maybe monetary constraints, in lieu, but they are also wanting to follow the direction of DTSC, engage the community when it's time. So if there's a vapor intrusion evaluation and it's required that we need to go into residential homes and grab all the access agreements, sometimes public response can vary, or sometimes it just doesn't seem like it's, I don't want to say adequate, but if we reach out to 20 people and 2 people respond, sometimes it can seem that there is a varying level of required engagement or number of attempts depending on the DTSC project team. Does DTSC plan to standardize expectations on number of attempts? Just to remind us, this is kind of just trying to gauge on how do we set expectations to maybe a client who might be a bit more conscientious of costs.
So I see Lenny's hand. Go ahead and start with that, Lenny, if you want to respond.
Yeah, so that's often the case, and often the problem is not with the particular project, but the history of people's relationship to the government, either our government or the government in the country they came from. One strategy is to find local community groups, not necessarily environmental groups, but churches, PTAs, whatever, that are trusted by the community, and have them introduce you to the neighborhood, whether it be via social media or in person. In the case of, I showed a slide from Fort Gillem, Georgia. The Army held meetings and nobody came. Well, the people who brought me in were working with the NAACP, and they had no problem getting people to a meeting, and they would have had no problem getting people to agree to sampling their homes.
And I saw Ben put himself on camera. I think, Ben, you want to respond as well.
Yeah, and just specifically around, our DTSC and the water boards standardizing exactly what has to be done reaching out to a community. We want to acknowledge that each community is different, each project is different, so how much needs to be done to reach out to get engagement may vary some. At the moment, the best advice I can give is to really just document the efforts and be able to make a compelling case to your project team, to the regulators, that you've put forward a good faith effort to reach out to the community. You've really tried, and being able to give your regulatory team something that they can say, okay, we can agree with you that you really did have a good faith effort to reach out and try it as hard as you could. But that's good feedback for us too, to say, okay, if we can document a little bit of that and standardize some, that's helpful.
And Amber and Jennifer, your hands were still raised. I lowered them. If you have another question, please go ahead and re-raise your hand. I'm going to read out a question from the Q&A. There's a general question about how to protect workers on sites with vapor intrusion issues, particularly methane. What kind of mitigation measures are typically used during the excavation, grading, and site preparation phase?
Hi, this is Steve. I think anytime you have workers on a site where you have these conditions and need to be following OSHA protocol and wearing appropriate PPE, that personal the right respirators and everything and that means that you need to have the data and the information available for you to do a good health and safety plan. So they're working on it. I'm going to let the team maybe help answer on some of the other mitigation measures that could be done to help protect workers as well.
Well, I'll jump in. If they're doing an excavation and it's within a closed building, sometimes there's the mitigation measures such as industrialized fans to increase airflow. That is one method there if they're doing site work.
And I will also just point out, while there's a number of ways to mitigate the health effects from a number of compounds, such as increased ventilation, fans, etc., a part of this question was asking specifically for methane. Methane is a little bit different than a lot of what else we've been talking about with vapor intrusion, because the biggest danger of methane is the explosion hazard. And there are some very specific requirements for working around high methane environments that are pretty different than the requirements around vapor intrusion, such as lower explosive limit sensors, tools that don't arc. If you really are working in high methane zones, that is something to make sure that you have contractors, consultants, and workers who are really experienced there, because that is an explosion risk that is different than the health risks that we're mostly talking about with vapor intrusion. So I'd encourage you to make sure that you've got someone who really knows what they're doing if it is a high methane environment.
Okay. The next question that I see in the Q&A, at our site, bioremediation techniques were discarded as a potential remediation solution due to cost, but would have been supported by community members and likely would have improved local ecological well-being. For contractors responsible for cleanup, are folks able to share success stories on ways to reconcile these conflicting interests? And I'll ask our panelists if anyone from the panel wants to answer, or we have a lot of environmental consultants on the line and a great bit of wealth of information in the room. And because the question asker does specifically ask for contractors on the line, does anyone have suggestions about how to bridge the gap and success with innovative cleanup technologies? Okay, I see a hand up from Mark Rigby. I'm going to unmute you. Mark. It looks like you're unmuted, but we do not hear you.
Needed to click a second button. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
The question can be answered in a couple of different ways, but it depends on what the questioner was asking when they meant bioremediation. Normally, contractors such as myself, when we say the word bioremediation, we mean adding bacteria into the groundwater and something the bacteria can eat, which I don't think is what the questioner was asking, because that's not really going to be good for the ecosystem. Um, if the questioner, however, meant things like phytoremediation, which is planting trees, there are pros and cons to planting trees for remediation of chlorinated solvents in groundwater. One of the cons is that the trees don't actually destroy the TCE or PCE. They merely take it out of the groundwater and put it into the air. So they put it into the outdoor air that you breathe. It's going to be at lower concentrations than indoor air, but they're just moving it. One of the other limitations for phytoremediation is how deep the groundwater is. If groundwater is at 10, 20, 30, maybe 40 feet, you can use trees to do what I just described. But if it's deeper than that, it's generally not possible. You can ask the questioner if that answers their question.
Max, who answered the question, do you want to either respond in he responded in the Q&A. Yes, that helps. Thank you. And I have seen some presentations about endophyte enhanced phytoremediation, that there are some trees or some plant species and ways to enhance this technique where they actually can degrade the contamination. Often it's a reaction in the root zone. And so it's not just the pumping, although the pumping can be an important aspect, but there can be a degradation aspect as well. So it is something that you need contractors that are very familiar with the exact situation, it's site specific, and that know the technologies. Okay, I see another hand from Larry Leroy Ladd.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that our perennial Green Party congressional candidate always wants to see more phytoremediation. So I thank you guys for elaborating on that. Just a quick technical question on that. If you've got a tree that's pumping out TCE and it's a large tree, does the TCE rise or does it settle down to where people will be sitting underneath the tree? That's a basic question I don't know an answer for.
I can speak to that briefly, but typically in these phytoremediation projects, the rate at which they are removing PCE and TCE from the subsurface is slow enough that there's no detectable accumulation of PCE and TCE in the air near the tree. But it would be something in a given, project that's doing phytoremediation that you may want to consider.
All right, thank you, Ben. I'm not seeing any more hands. Actually, Larry, I think I just lowered your hand and it came back up.
Yeah, here we go.
Oh, okay. Were there any other questions?
Hey, Cheryl, I just wanted to let people know that ITRC also just started a phyto remediation team. So that is something that the ITRC is working on. And the team, I think, just started their kickoff. So they're starting the development of guidance documents, kind of like what was done for the VI team to address phytoremediation. So that could potentially be another source of information in the future, or for those that are involved that want to either learn more, but are consultants and want to be involved with that as well, the ITRC phytoremediation team.
Thank you for that, Jen. Okay, we do have about 20 more minutes allocated, so we have time for more questions. But if I don't see more hands or more questions in the Q&A feature, I will wrap it up. Okay, one more question. Richard, I will let you unmute.
Okay, hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't know if this is pertinent or not to this particular session, but I thought maybe I could at least get an answer. There's some significant errors in the soil gas guidance document, how to do soil gas testing. And how would I get this? They've become kind of serious, and what would be the right contacts? Who would I be contacting to try to? Yeah, I've reached out before in the past without any action, but I am a director at a testing laboratory, and I've got some issues that have become really significant. So just if there's anyone there that can direct me or is interested in the subject, I can talk about it.
Can you advance the slide deck 2 slides? So, and one more. So this is the general contact info. If you send an email to the dwq-vaporintrusion@waterboards.ca.gov email, we will make sure that someone is watching for your email and gets a response.
Great.
And this also has the general websites for both the Water Board and DTSC for the vapor intrusion programs. And the contact info is there as well.
Super.
And for all of you, if other questions pop up or you want to have one-on-one discussions about your questions, please use the DWQ Vapor Intrusion website. It is a DWQ Vapor Intrusion email address. It is a water board's email address, but we meet regularly with a joint team between OEHA, Water Board, and DTSC. And so we do discuss the questions that come in and make sure that we're providing a unified, calibrated answer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, if you can go back 2 more slides. So if I don't see more hands, I'm going to ease into the reminder of what's coming next. We've had great participation today, and when I was scanning the list of attendees who pre-registered, I saw a lot of familiar names, so I expect that many of you are going to avail yourselves of the rest of the series. The next one is March 10th, Conceptual Site Model and Best Practices. Then in May, Path to Closure and Collective Decision Making. And in June, Vapor Intrusion Data. So look forward to seeing any of you again. And if you have colleagues who you think might be interested, encourage them to sign up as well. Next slide. So we are making the presentation materials available on request. Please, again, email that general DWQ Vapor Intrusion email box, and we will get the copy of the presentations to you. And we are going to be posting the presentation both on the Water Board's website and on DTSC's, and the links are there. And with that, if there are no more questions, I'm going to say another thank you to all of our panelists, especially Lenny Siegel for providing his valuable community insights. And a thank you to all of the participants who joined us today, with a special thank you to the nonprofits and community members who joined. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time and attention.